This is Hindol Sengupta. I am delighted that Professor Subhash Kak has joined me. Subhash Kak is he's not new to this program or to this platform. We've had him on a couple of times before talking about various issues. Subhash Kak has many identities, but fundamentally, he began as a pioneering researcher in science and computer science, mathematics and computer science, and he has many pioneering papers, one of whom which he will refer to today. And from this work in computer science, he evolved into what I would really call one of the best researchers and writers on ideas from India, especially scientific ideas from India. He's done pioneering work in that field and is widely respected as one of the best minds in that field. Subhash Kak, welcome.
Thank you, Hindol. Glad to be on your program.
Professor, let me begin by talking to you about something which I have no doubt you're following very closely. DeepSeek, the Chinese AI advancement that has shaken the world, certainly shaken all the stock markets. I believe Nvidia is down 560 billion. Such a drop has never happened in the history of the stock markets. Um, Really, a lot of change happening. You were one of the pioneers in thinking about AI and how AI would work. I wonder, when you look at this entire scenario, how do you see it? How do you see America's advancements? And how do you see China's challenge?
Well, no, it's actually quite a tangled story. The emphasis on AI and generative AI, where you can answer questions or have a conversation or create patterns, etc., is going to change and is already changing the workplace, the economy in many different ways. And OpenAI, ChatGPT, and systems or models similar to that one, we're sitting on the top of the heap, so to speak. And then suddenly from nowhere comes this small group, and they claim they've spent only $5 million, and they come up with a product which is nearly as good as ChatGPT. It costs only 5% of the energy or hardware that the so-called mainstream technology uses. So you're right, it has shaken up the market, but people are also investigating the reason why DeepSeek has been so successful. And it's already clear that what has happened is that rather than use a sledgehammer to kill an ant, they are using lesser resources. And that's where they have done some innovation. You know, the chat GPT kind of a system use this entire network with 671 billion parameters to train, to extract the information there is. But DeepSeek doesn't do that. And in fact, I've used DeepSeek yesterday with some queries, and I was rather shocked. But in fact, I was underwhelmed by what it did. And basically, what it did was to pull five or six or seven different pieces of information that were, let's say, on the top of the first page on Google. You go there, you pull that information, and you print that information, and then organize it at the end. So, in other words, you have some kind of a language processing system which gathers the information which is very easily available. And in fact, this is an idea which goes back into the 90s. In the 90s, people are talking about what were then called meta search engines. You had big engines at that time where I don't think Google had come into the picture. You had InfoSeek and Yahoo and this and that. So meta search engine, what it did was didn't have its own database. So it went to these search engines and got that information and then put it together in a file, and that's what you saw. Now, this is something similar that DeepSeek has done. Rather than use the entire internet to scour for information, which is apparently what ChatGPT does, or ChatGPT kind of systems do. It gets information which is already available very easily, very readily. You just Google that particular item that you're looking for and then put it all together. I'm not saying that this is what it does for all kinds of tasks, but at least the queries that I used, I found that this is what is happening, and so it wasn't all that impressive. But maybe this is maybe not all that different from what a lot of what Chat GPT also does, because sometimes what it gives you seems substantive, but when you actually analyze it, it seems you know, rather lacking in deeper content. And that, but still, it can be a very useful first draft. You want some information. You're creating a proposal or writing a story, and you put in some words in the query box, and then you come up with a first draft which you can work on. And I think it's a very good thing from that perspective. In any event, what DeepSeek has done has shaken up the AI establishment in America. And so what they'll do is they'll also try to use a more nuanced system, and that would bring down the costs. And the reason why NVIDIA stocks tanked, at least for a day, because I believe yesterday they jumped back up, was because NVIDIA's hardware was being used big time by OpenAI and similar AI-based search engines. You know, you needed huge amounts of hardware, and NVIDIA has a huge markup. But now suddenly you realize that perhaps you can do a similar search at 5% of the cost, which means 5% of the hardware. Now, if NVIDIA can't sell its chips at the rate which were factored in its price, right? So clearly the price would fall, and I think that's what's happened.
Just a little bit about what this means geopolitically, because America spent a lot of effort, including President Trump's own proclamations, that China would never be allowed to compete effectively, in fact, far less surpass America in the most important technology that everybody seems to think matters, which is artificial intelligence. And indeed, American tariffs, American barriers would make it impossible for America to access many critical technologies, including the most high end chips made by a company like NVIDIA. I think they're called 1000 GPU chips or something like that, right? Now, if China cannot access 1000 GPU chips from NVIDIA or companies like that, it will not be able to build competing artificial intelligence technologies that compete with, you know, Sam Altman's company, Grok of Elon Musk, and so on and so forth, Microsoft, and so on and so forth. All of this turns on its head if this is the sort of success that Chinese companies begin to show. And from what I understand, clearly, this is DeepSeek is not the only one. There's a whole plethora of Chinese companies that are coming up who are doing their own versions of this technology and who will then be able to effectively compete with American technology, even though they clearly don't have access to exactly the same resources. This takes American and Chinese competition to a whole new level, Professor.
Totally agree. It has very important geopolitical implications. But, you know, the fact that the US was trying to deny Chinese companies certain kinds of hardware, certain advanced chips, that's also motivated China to create its own chips. And they're caught up, like Huawei is now producing chips which are equivalent to the most advanced chips, at least in certain sectors. So it does change. Now, as far as applications are concerned, basically what it does is it makes the playing field more equal for everybody, and it also reduces the costs in the West itself, because now Western companies would realize that, well, we were probably not doing it as effectively as is possible to do. So let's also use the same shortcuts that DeepSeek has used, and they will do it. And basically, it'll reduce the costs. And what might it do? You know, the promise of AI is in sectors such as transportation, self-driven cars and many other things. And there, certain things will get faster. So ultimately, the challenge that AI poses for societies everywhere will stay. Just look at the US. In US, about 60 or 70% of all the jobs, according to some analysts, are in the transportation sector. If if you have self-driven trucks and taxis used everywhere, suddenly 60 or 70% of the jobs will go away. In fact, in my recent book, which just came out last week, called The Age of I argue that the other side of the story, of the AI story, is the fact that the world population is collapsing. And China's population is estimated or expected to become one-fourth of what it is now by the end of the century. So in other words, China's population in 2100 may only be about 360 million. And right now it's 1.4 billion. So that's going to have great implications as well. In fact, there are certain analysts who say that China would probably cease to be a great power if China's population falls that much. But on the other hand, it's giving motivation or incentive for China to work even harder in the AI field, in robotics, use industrial robots to still be the world's manufacturing hub. So interesting stuff going on. It's not clear where it'll all go. China lacks something that the US has. In my view, US still has the upper hand. Why? Because they, at the top of the food chain in industry is finance. And US has a kind of a stranglehold on it because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. And the new president, Trump, is prepared to use whatever is needed to make sure that no rival appears. For example, the BRICS nations were saying that, hey, we're not going to use the dollar, we'll use some other currency that they would develop themselves. I don't think that's going to happen, not just because of Trump's threats, also because BRICS itself is not totally aligned. Its main players are not totally aligned in their vision, in their focus. And there are tremendous stresses, for example, between China and India, China being a aggressive country in the sense of trying to occupy as much of land as is possible, which is rather bizarre, considering that in the post information age, it's not physical occupation of land, but rather information, which is of the greatest importance. But in any event, CCP still stuck in the past, is using that strategy, but it creates complications, which makes it harder for the rest of the world to mount a challenge to American hegemony. And likewise, Europe has at this point become a kind of a vassal to the US. And Europe has tremendous internal problems, both political and problems related to immigrants who have come in very large numbers and are, for various reasons, unable to assimilate in society. So to go back to your question, I think this will also be a passing story in a few days. DeepSeek might get certain clients, and then AI search has its own limitations, because in spite of ChatGPT and Grok and so on, we still use Google, for most of our search, because we want to do that synthesis ourselves. We just want one or two sites. We don't want a much more complicated response unless we are doing a certain specific project. And that's where generative AI does come in. You are in a ad company. You want to create different kinds of images as candidates for further decision making. Yeah, so limited use. And I think the power that America holds because of its domination at the very top will persist for some more time. And that's where, Trump's shaking up the whole thing and saying that, well, I also want Greenland and I want Canada, and I want the Panama Canal. And this is, of course, motivated by this idea that technology has changed. European powers in the 19th and 18th century did what they did because they controlled the shipping lanes, and countries in Asia were behind technology. So they ultimately lost control of their political destinies. But now it's different. Now you have much more democratization of technological power, and that's one reason. Um, you know, China and America, and of course, you might also ask, what about India? India is the world's third largest economy by way of PPP. Well, but let me complete the previous thought. So with this technology, it becomes easier to see why national boundaries perhaps would be redrawn. You have you can do things in a global way in terms of information, and that's where Trump is ahead of other countries. He is leaders of other countries. He's thinking, he's doing maybe n-dimensional chess, and nobody else would have had the courage to have said that, hey, even though Canada is my ally, I want Canada. Or even though Denmark is a part of NATO, we want Denmark. And that's where his playing jujitsu is going to keep his opponents off balance. So in the short term, US is fine. US's hegemony remains. And now India could be a major competitor, but India has not chosen to develop its own technology. China has various kinds of platforms in AI and search because they put a firewall 15 or 20 years ago on the internet, and their own companies had to create that technology. India is just playing, second fiddle to Western companies. So although India could be a pair in a three-cornered game, and that would have been very, very interesting, but not for the time being.
Let's talk a little, before we come to India, let's talk a little bit about China. One of the things that you pointed out is this decline of Chinese population, which everybody's been talking about, and the collapse of Chinese population being the single largest threat to China's any hope of dominance, including any hope of effectively countering US hegemonic power, at least in the next near future. Now, there are two questions that are relevant here. Number one, the decline in population is not as rapid as some people make it to be. As you said, this will take up to 2100 to really have enormous impact. The other more important question, of course, is that China is really building technological prowess that will allow it to really dominate the world, even if it only has 300 million people. We cannot forget that America itself has only 300 million rough people, and America has dominated the world for most of the last century. So, therefore, there is no reason why, Professor Kak, in a far more advanced technological age, with a smaller population but very advanced technology, China can not hope to do the same. And I wonder, what are your views on both those two subjects? The demographic change, is it happening fast enough? And number two, of course, what is the reason that we shouldn't anticipate that China would hope to dominate the way the US does with technological advancement?
I agree with you. Not only will China's population fall, but so will the population in the European region fall. And in fact, it's already started contracting. Russia's population is falling, Ukraine, Italy, Spain, and other Western European countries are making up for that shortfall by immigration. But that would probably create much greater problems for these countries, including the US. In the US, also, the white population has been falling since the 1970s. And from about 80% white in 1970, US is up only 58% white right now. And it'll fall below 50% in the next 15 or 20 years. So it's changing everywhere. And you're right. What China can do and is doing is to make up for that fall by investing even in a more aggressive way into technology, and that's a good thing. But China, if you have too much of a trade surplus, that can also become your weakness. For international relations, if you are operating from a sense of equality, that's when friendships between nations exist. But if you are exporting too much, then the countries that you're exporting to have have a weapon that they can apply against. They can certainly put tariffs, for example, and that will also create havoc, because now one of the weaknesses of China is the dictatorship of the Communist Party. If suddenly the US and Europe were to say that we are not going to import from China after 3 or 4 years, or reduce it very drastically, there could be social unrest in China. And this is where the West is going to use whatever it takes to ensure its hegemony, as it's used in India as well. In India, it uses NGOs, or it can use opposition leaders. Hey, do this, because that's what and you can dress it up in um, neoliberal intellectual thought that this is the way to go. But in reality, doing so through NGOs, you are serving the interests of the ruling class in the West. So you cannot say what will actually happen, what will actually transpire. Uh, each of these regions, the Chinese are trying to do the best with what they have, and they have seen headwinds in the last 5 6 years because of the pressure from the US, and the employment situation in China is pretty bad right now for the youth, and there are many empty cities. They have invested too much, and people are not quite clear about the numbers associated with the Chinese economy. They don't trust those numbers completely. But then, on the other hand, China has very modern cities, and they've used technology in a way which is not being done in the West. Western cities, even American cities, there's crime, there is all kind of other problems, or decaying infrastructure, which is not the case in China. But of course, the one who holds the upper hand right now and has control of these international institutions can at least hope to maintain that power for some time. It certainly does have it right now. And what the West is going to do, what America is going to do as the hegemon, is use both Europe, and Europe, as we've already said, is a vassal, and also use India to the extent it can. And because India not having any of the AI stuff, even though there is talk that there are some startups which are doing this or that, but in reality, we don't have any credible alternatives to the platforms and to the technologies, even though it doesn't cost very much. India could do it, but you have to have a national vision related to that. For example, look at Coup app, which was a social media company from India, and it's folded because it didn't get the support that it needed. And why does it need the support? Because American companies also get a lot of off the books subsidies from DoD. One of the reasons why Google went so big, because it gets off the books DoD. Not all of DoD's Department of Defense budget is published by the Congress. And so Indians, sometimes Indian leaders say that, well, Indian companies should survive on their own. And certain companies have done very well, like Geo, right? So maybe people with experience and with deep pockets could create alternatives to DeepSeek within India, and then hope to have people all across the world use them. I think it's possible. And I speak of it from my personal experience because I worked in these areas myself. In fact, the very first one of the very first patents on neural networks. All of this technology is based on neural networks. What is my patent in 1995? It's called Neural Networks and Methods of Training Neural Networks. And also, I was the first person to suggest the use of instantaneous learning for improving the performance of search engines. In fact, IEEE Intelligent Systems, which is one of the premier journals in this in 1999, they invited me to write an article on it, how you could have better web searches and responses. And that's what DeepSeek or ChatGPT is trying to do. So in a certain sense, this is 25 years ago, and it could have been picked up by any company in India as well, because now the patents have expired, and it was sold to an American company, and it's a part of what many American companies do in financial time series forecasting as well. But you need self confidence, like the one that DeepSeek team displayed. Okay, this is what we want to do, and this is how OpenAI does. Sam Altman's OpenAI does. So let's see how can we do it faster. Because when you are ahead, you think that's the only way, but there are always ways to do things better, and that's where Indian companies will also have to do innovation.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about how the US can respond now to what has clearly been thrown as a challenge by China. There are, like I said, not just DeepSeek, a whole plethora of companies that are emerging from China who are publishing papers. Their processes are valid, they're publishing papers on it. And also, the other thing about DeepSeek, they're making it all open source. They're not keeping this technology restricted. And one of the geopolitical challenges that America and other countries face from this is, if China's methodologies in artificial intelligence and platforms become widespread and used, then in fact the world's economic processes as far as artificial intelligence and technology is concerned will in fact be running on engines driven by China. So essentially, all of these methods and processes will use Chinese devices and Chinese platforms, and which means the CCP will have access to all of this. I mean, we would be naive and foolish to believe that the Chinese Communist Party would not use and would not, in fact, weaponize some of these things if the need were to occur. Now, how do you think the US can respond to this? Clearly, on pure basis of raising guardrails, doesn't seem to be working.
All this could happen. Uh, Look at OpenAI. If you want their business, upgraded version, then you have to pay $200 a month. You also have the free version that anybody can use. While the Chinese might say, okay, we're going to charge you only $5 a month. So what will happen? There'll be a trade war. The American companies will also bring it down to $10 a month. So it'll be good for the user. So that's one side. The other side is, just as America is trying to ban TikTok or pressure TikTok so that half of it will be owned by the US. In fact, that's what Trump's gambit is. That, okay, I let Americans use it, but America wants to buy half of it. So they can use the same strategy again. They could tell DeepSeek or other similar Chinese companies, well, you in China have a firewall. You don't allow Google or other companies to be used, or other platforms to be used in China. We're not going to allow any of you to be used in America. See, that's where America has a very powerful instrument. If China is supplying things, they need to be supplied to US. Why? Because US has unlimited money. They are printing dollars. Every year is $2 or $3 trillion in deficit. So they have all the money. So that's the money that companies and people in other countries covet, right? And so they need to sell to the US, and US can any day say, we don't want it. We don't want it unless you give half the ownership to us or you give us the 70% ownership. So eventually, profits will come back to the US. See, it's the same problem in India. Supposing India were to develop the very best AI based model search engine, right? And there's a company which does it, and suddenly its valuation becomes, say, 100 billion. Next day, American VCs, they'll say, okay, we want to buy you out for 150 billion. So the company will once again uh, pass to American ownership. It's a very asymmetric situation. I don't think, if you really analyze it, China's threat, I think it's a passing story, and that's the reason why Nvidia's stock jumped back up the next day. I mean, American companies will adjust to it. They have a lot of room to adjust. The kind of money that is being made by some of these companies is absolutely astronomical, and which is one of the reasons it's also showing up in the inflation that is taking place, especially in the housing market in the US in the last 5, 7, 10 years. Absolutely incredible. And so I don't think this will have any major effect in the asymmetry that exists between China and America in the technological field. And America can always do uh, in association with Europe. For example, China has suddenly exploded in the EV market, uh, selling electric vehicles to Europe. But Europe can suddenly, if America says, well, China's threat has become too serious, they can say we are going to ban all electric vehicles from China. So that can happen. And that's one of the reasons why US is saying, or Trump is saying, or at least his advisors mostly saying that we want Greenland because Greenland has some of these rare minerals. We want access to these minerals which go into the creation of batteries and all that. So it's that game being played. I don't think it's going to change things in the short term at all. And in the long term, um, China has its strengths. Its managers are very good, strong managers, engineering managers in companies. Chinese are very hardworking people, and kudos to them for being hardworking. But it has problems. It is not a democracy, um, and it has also a lot of disparity between the uh, city areas or urban areas and the poorer areas, and uh, and then there could be, what the elites in the West are also saying that look, we wanted this war in Russia because. As the foreign secretary in EU said just a couple of days ago, we want to break up Russia into smaller countries. But that is the first step. Ultimately, we want to break up China as well and India as well. So, this is what all kinds of stuff will continue to happen. That's the stuff of history. That's such things have happened in the past as well.
I want to ask you one last question before we wrap up. Professor, how do you think a country like India ought to respond to this? Because, as you said, despite all the talk about AI startups and stuff, actually, the truth be told, India doesn't have much leverage in this sector at all. India is building some good tech. The UPI in fintech is a clear example of that. But as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, cutting edge technology in this field, we do not have enough leverage. How do you think we should, counter this, tackle this? Because this is not only a financial and economic risk, but it's also a major geopolitical risk.
Absolutely. What India has to do is to get into it. If DeepSeek could do it on just $5 million, which is nothing. $5 million is nothing. It's small change with a group of 100 people. Or this can be done. It can be done by Mr. Ambani, or it could be done by some established big house because certain upfront investment has to be made. I don't think the government can do it. No government can do it. Governments in the West also can't do it. You need experienced people. And then in India, sometimes the tendency is, okay, let's give money to such and such universities, and they'll form centers at IITs or ISC. Professors can't do it. Professors in America or in China also can't do it. Only companies can do it. And perhaps some kind of subsidies need to be given by the government, even though private companies are doing it. It's maybe Cool app needs to be revived, or you need a search engine, then you need other similar platforms like the ones that the West has. And not just do it for India, do it for the whole world. Be another major player. You have the Chinese who have firewalled their own country. Now you have the Americans and Europeans, and then India is the third largest economy. Where are we? We need to stand up and be counted.
Those are very, those are very powerful words, and really, I hope everybody's listening, including Indian entrepreneurs and the Indian state. Thanks very much, Subhash Kak. As always, Professor, delight talking to you. Thank you for your insight into the entire DeepSeek story and where the story will evolve from here. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.